Okay.
4 minutes.
Everybody ready?
No, hang on.
Mariah, is one of these your pen that you left?
Yeah. Thank you for your possessive thoughts. I think it's just something else. Thank you.
Yep. In today's debate, you need to compare the world of the affirmative and the world of the negative. We are in a deadly epidemic dealing with assault weapons. In the world of the affirmative, you see a decrease in mass shootings and a decrease in their effects, in which you see that people are able to survive and keep their lives going. The world of the negative and the negative team will try to tell you that they can increase mental health and background checks, but that is not what their job in today's debate is. The negation is advocating for right now in the status quo, and don't allow them to tell you that they're going to increase these background checks without showing you legislation that will pass in Congress. With that, we can look at our first justification of mass shootings. Doing the math, because there have been 26 mass shootings in 2018 alone, the world of the negative will see at least 39 more in 2018. The world of the affirmative is the only way that we can have any chance of solving this, because 1, assault weapons can shoot faster, meaning that there are more deaths in a shorter amount of time. Even if they try to claim trade-off, if a mass shooter was using a handgun, then the time that it took them to kill as many people, you would see a response from 911 and police that would be able to stop them. I would love for the negative to come up here and try to tell you that a mass shooter using a handgun is going to kill more people than a person using an AR-15. Even more with their own evidence using a knife or their fists. With that, we can keep looking down. Assault weapons are more dangerous. They do more damage and do that damage faster. Even if they say that they're not used in as many crimes, the problem is the crimes that they are used in have a lot more casualties and effects than the ones that they're not. But now we can look at a couple of their own arguments. First, on circumvention. What you need to pay attention to is that the affirmative evidence does not just reference Australia. That's what the negative tries to tell you. Instead, it shows that the United States ban actually saw increases in security and decreases in the effects of assault weapons. That means that even if there was circumvention, we at least saw some positive impacts from that legislation. That means that no matter what, the affirmative is still a better position than the negative. The negative is a sitting duck. They're sitting there and waiting and hoping for people and our congressmen in a Republican-controlled Congress to pass mysterious legislation that they cannot tell us what it's about or what it's doing in order to prevent mass shootings. While when you look at the affirmative, we can tell you what we're doing, how it will help, and we've provided statistical research showing why it helps, empirical evidence that it's helped in the past. Whereas the negative can only reference a campaign that isn't even supported by Republicans. And finally, when you look at their trade-off, they still can't mention any distinct advantages that this brings to the negative in the debate. If anything, trade-off is an affirmative, a justification, because it shows that no matter what, any weapon other than an assault weapon will be less dangerous, less casualties, and less deaths. If you want children to be safe at schools, adults to be safe in their workplace, then you have to vote for the affirmative, because we are the only side that takes substantive action that will actually solve the problems of our world today.
Okay.
C5.
That's fine.
Yeah, I also have to block out because I have something to say.
Okay, then I can just speak.
Okay.
I was like, interesting. Like,
Very good. The affirmative is right on one thing. We are comparing the worlds of the negative and the affirmative, and we are facing a deadly epidemic. However, whenever you compare these worlds, in every instance, you'll prefer the negative. The negative's proposition is that instead of focusing on assault weapons bans that sap political capital and mean that we cannot focus on any other things like background checks, mental health screenings, or necessary policies like these that limit the use of weapons by dangerous individuals, instead, we put all of our efforts toward those. Because of the midterms that are happening in less than 2 months, Republicans and the Democrats are working harder than ever to try to produce bipartisan policies to show that they've been effective and worthy of re-election. This is reason more than ever that they would cooperate on something so bipartisan as background checks and mental health screenings. Is it entirely feasible that the negative's policies would go through? And the negative is the only side in the debate that actually has evidence on lobbying. You can prefer this distinct evidence about political capital, lobbying groups, such as the Brady campaign, that indicate that Republicans and Democrats alike are favorable towards policies like the negative. This means that they are likely to pass in the status quo, but the affirmative saps any potential for that to happen. So in every instance, you prefer the negative. First of all, there's less circumvention. The affirmative has not adequately responded to this. First, there would be black markets that would rise up because of a ban on assault weapons. This is empirically demonstrated by bans in other countries and especially within the United States. They have not been responsive to this at all throughout the debate. Black markets, and this would then lead to monopoly for the cartels and for criminals. So then law-abiding citizens who would like to legally obtain certain weapons would not be able to in order to adequately defend themselves. This is something that the affirmative uniquely denies individuals. There's also circumvention through DIY guns. People would be able to craft their own assault weapons, and this would also be legal, as demonstrated by the fact that they couldn't even define what an assault weapon was in cross-ex, and they still haven't defined it. The best instance that they gave was that it's a weapon used in war. In the 94 ban, they had similarly vague wordings, and all of our evidence indicates that when you have these vague wordings, people just circumvent them, so then they can still have just as deadly weapons, just slightly modified so that then they're legal, and they can still use them to enact all of the harms that they're talking about. There's also about how the AF is outweighed by other types of violence. Sarah decided to focus on the fists, feet, and knives part, but you can also look towards handguns. Handguns contribute 90% of violence within the United States. The affirmative does nothing to check back on this. You can prefer the negative in this case specifically because we would deny the ability for people who are mentally unstable or people who have had past of domestic abuse or hit and runs or anything like that would not be able to own handguns and thus enact that day-to-day violence. You should prefer the day-to-day structural violence that you can see in the United States that we should prevent through better health measures instead of elaborate, fancified mass shooting instances such as Sandy Hook's or the Orlando shooting that aren't nearly as common or as frequent. The third is about political capital. I already discussed this above, but you just need to think about how if you pass the affirmative, there's no chance for them to pass later gun policies that would instead restrict people based on mental health and background checks. To go on to the affirmative case pretty quickly, they say that there are 26 mass shootings in 2018 alone. This is specific to their first piece of evidence, but again, this evidence is not specific to assault weapons. Mass shootings, first of all, are pretty fanciful, pretty elaborate, and so that is just something to try to sway you over when really the day-to-day are what we really need to focus on, and it isn't specific enough to assault weapons that people could first circumvent and then have alternative forms of violence. The circumvention means that they can have just as deadly weapons that are technically legal, or just the other forms of violence such as handguns.